you guys, we've alluded to this a little bit. You guys have had different events in the history, as raising some money early.
He made more money than I did.
So in terms of the initial fundraising, private equity, we've talked about that. So let's talk about Charles. You alluded to you didn't sell your control position at first. Eventually, you did make the choice to sell your control position. So maybe let's start with you. When did you decide it was time? You talked a little bit about the private equity taking something off the table for personal and other reasons. What was kind of the decision-making process around, okay, I'm ready to let go of this thing in full?
Yeah, so we actually, again, we're very goal-driven, so we actually set goals to say, well, when we hit 100 million revenue, at least 15% EBITDA, we prove out the grocery channel, we're just entering mass market and Costco. Like, we actually had all these defined goals that said, when we hit all these things, because we know that those are the things our universe of buyers will love.
Right.
If we didn't prove out Costco, Club, Mass,
Right.
we would be leaving money on the table.
Right.
So we just said, when we hit all these things here, we'll go.
Right.
And so that's what we did. When we hit it, we're like, okay, let's start the process. We'll bring in the advisors. So we did our banker bake-off. Then we brought in our legal team. We brought in accountants. And so we built out this process very, very tightly.
Right.
And we did a year of preparation before that, leading up to that, 3 years audited financials from a big bank, from a big accounting firm, which is very important, and really ticked off every box of what. Basically, we did fake diligence on ourselves. Where would we get beaten up by a buyer? And so we beat ourselves up first, overcame everything. Everything's in neat little binders. Data room was already built like a year in advance. And we are building it for sale. So by the time we're going to go to exit, it was just matter of fact. The biggest thing is to not underestimate the amount of time it takes to prepare, start to finish. It's like a 9-month process, it's like having a baby. And the amount of time that if you want to do the best job for your company, you as the founder, as a CEO, needs to do. Like, I spent half my time on this for many, many months, including traveling all over to meet the CEOs and C-suites of many of the top potential buyers of our company. And all the biggest final bidders all came from that legwork.
Right.
And sometimes, some of them I had years of relationship with before. So there's a lot of ways to create value. The more purposeful you are, the more organized you are about it, the more prepared you are about it, the more likely you're gonna achieve it.
So, Leo, Charles is probably preaching to the choir when we're talking about being organized and diligent and sorted. Maybe can you give us a sense of kind of, each process is a little bit different, of course, but what are the kind of the typical stages in a sales process once a company decides, okay, we want to sell and we want to run a bit of an auction or similar process to realize the best outcome? Maybe you can share a little bit of how that works.
Yeah, sure. No, that's helpful, Ali. So I think the preparation piece is key. There's always a certain amount of information that should be in a preparable format to engage in a discussion. A typical sell-side process was largely 2 or 3 phases. The first one being engaging with the market. So that's finding out who the potential buyers are, preparing a short list, and then going out to those buyers with a minimal amount of information. I like to sort of think about it as a bit of a funnel. You've got a funnel at the top where you've got a greater number of parties with limited information. And as you move down that funnel and provide more information, you can have higher quality conversations. But at the outset, the information needs to be confirmatory, like it needs to be supportable. It can't just be flipping financial statements. Like, that's probably one of the most common things that gets done, but the worst thing to do is to just send your financial statements to a potential investor or a buyer, because there's no opportunity to craft the story. What have you done? Where are you going? Who's the team? What's the product portfolio? And so in terms of running through a process, first stage would be to prepare an information package. And that can be done, again, preparation is key, but it can take as little as 30 to 45 days. And then reaching out to that investor group in the funnel, sign an NDA, and then ask for initial expressions of interest. You can get those within about 45 days of starting your process. And then you select a handful of parties or more to come to what's called a management presentation. And within that, you're meeting with those potential investors. It sounds like you're going to visit them in some cases, spending some time together, getting to know who the other parties are and what their aspirations are. What do they want to do with your brand, what your business, and then also what can they do for you? And from that, you're asking for final bids. Typically, you would get, if you brought 5 parties into the next round, let's say you got 4 or 5 of those final bids, select one party and go exclusive. That's when the lawyers come in, the legal diligence. It's about a 90-day process to close. And so all the way along this process, you're providing more information, opening up the data room. And if you have garbage information, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you want solid bids that won't fall apart, you need to have rock solid information up front. So that's why in Charles's explanation there of pretending that you're getting, you want to beat up yourself and prepare that rock solid information. You can even do a quality of earnings report, which is a detailed audit type level assurance on some of your financial information. And so all those are tools that enable you to run a competitive process.
I might add that, because I did 2 transactions, if you have 5 investment bankers that come in and want to represent you, a lot of them are going to, it's like a real estate person. They're going to throw valuation at you that you say, how can you really need to ask the question, are they getting just the listing? Because that's what happened, the first company, one of our competitors sold for 18 times EBITDA. And they said, well, this is the target. We can deliver 18 times. Not realizing that the reason it got sold to Kellogg was the reason that price is because it was a special. It was a company that was owned by one of the Kellogg's brother, and they wanted so bad just to bring the family back together. That's why they paid 18 times. By the time we got 10 times EBITDA, suddenly the guy turned around and said, the market has changed. So you have to find the right partner. Versus the second time I did a transaction, the guy took a long time, and we had a lot of people evaluating the company, again, artificially. So you need to find the right investment banker that guides you to that journey of finding the right partner buyer.
I like what you said about guide. You cannot abdicate responsibility to your banker, no matter how good the banker is. Sorry, Leo, but the reality is your banker is a guide, but you still must take responsibility for what happens. So when I said to you I traveled over, that wasn't for management presentations. I did that to meet individually with CEOs of these big CPG companies and their C-suites to pre-sell. We call those fireside chats or preview meetings, to pre-sell, to ensure that at the very top they understood why they needed Vega, and not to just allow their corporate development teams, which typically are very financially driven, but maybe not vision driven. And that was really critical. Not only did I go and meet with them, I golfed with them, I hiked with them, I went to dinner with them, and I had meaningful interactions outside with over like 15 of these companies. And then when they came to the table, they had already had a much deeper understanding from a visionary perspective, from where it could go. So I took that responsibility myself to cultivate these and not just rely on the bankers to do their job. That's, I think, a really important part. And that goes through the entire thing. Like when we made the confidential information memorandum, we tore it apart, wrote it, rewrote it, made it look like our style, as if it was a Vega brochure. We added so many elements. We turned our management presentation room into a store, a Vega store. We built this thing. We made the people coming in to view the presentation ride our smoothie bikes and make their own smoothies. Like we just made it our own. And I think that taking that responsibility makes the investment banker's job a lot easier, because it adds firepower or horsepower to the outcome, because you can impact it.
It's interesting you say that. When we were selling Dea Foods, a couple similarities, a couple years after Vega, I think, but the fireside chats and the pre-meetings, the CEO at the time was a relationship master. I think he'd be a mentor to a lot of people in terms of how to work those relationships. Terry, and he was setting those things up weeks in advance, so that when that formal meeting came around, everybody was primed. The leadership knew, they had a face to connect with, they had a warm relationship. And it's funny, my partners were kind of knocking on my door at that time, but they had turned our boardroom into, there's fridges on the walls, and for a week our boardroom was closed off for management, our main boardroom, because they turned it into Dea World. And same thing, it created that feeling for buyers coming in.
It's no surprise, their banker was also one of our bankers.
Right. Yeah, of course. She's a legend.
So what I'm hearing from this is, in terms of the discussions you had with private equity, 5, 8 years even before you did a transaction, and your experiences talking to different investors and thinking about what they want along the way. It's never too early to engage in those discussions.
Right.
Just be cautious of what you're giving up information-wise. But it is an entrepreneur's duty to understand what they're getting into and who they're getting into partnership with.
That's right. Yeah, there's no excuse not to be prepared, right? Like people will spend more time choosing what car they drive or what house they buy than sell their business. That doesn't make sense to me. I think it's one of those things you have to own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.